Welcome to the Climate Teacher Ed webinar hosted by the Institute of Science and Math Education at the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm Dr. Deb L. Morrison, a research scientist with the Institute and a climate justice learning designer and advisor. I'll be co-moderating the discussion today along with my colleague, Dr. Philip Bell, a professor in the College of Education.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and taking part of your summer time to do so. This webinar series is an activity of a relatively new effort launched about 6 months ago called the Climate Teacher Ed Collaborative. The collaborative is a teacher education initiative dedicated to helping future teachers learn how to engage youth in community climate justice projects and to engage in civic activity in response to the climate crisis. This monthly webinar series brings together experts who can help us think about how teacher education can help accomplish those goals. So welcome and thank you for coming.
We hope the webinar series will be a really valuable resource for teacher educators and educators in general to focus instruction on just responses to the climate crisis. We encourage you to check out the professional learning resources we are sharing through the climate learning section of the stemteachingtools.org website. For those of you joining us live today, please post questions for the presenters in the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll collect them and share them. So today I'm joining from the unceded ancestral and current homelands and territories of the Wasanich peoples on Stayas, which is Pender Island, British Columbia in Canada.
And the University of Washington here operates on, and I live on, the lands of the Lushootseed speaking peoples, the Coast Salish peoples who identify as the Duwamish, Suquamish, Naqualami, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, and Tulalip peoples. We're deeply grateful for their history and ongoing stewardship of these lands and waters, and wish everyone will join us in recognizing their sovereignty as tribal nations in this work that we do in education. That sovereignty certainly extends to matters of educational sovereignty for their purposes of cultural continuance and thriving, and has very specific entailments when it comes to a just climate response and what education should look like to support that. So we're grateful to be here, and we're so thrilled to have Jason Foster and Ayesha T. Qazi-Lampert joining us today. Welcome.
Absolutely. Jason and I have known each other for quite a long time, so I'm really excited to have him here participating with his colleague, Ayesha. So Jason is a board certified instructor in the biological sciences and has taught biology for 15 years. He teaches at Evanston Township High School in Evanston, Illinois, and is engaged in University of Illinois at Chicago, MSU PhD program in curriculum and instruction with a focus on racial equity. Ayesha T. Qazi-Lampert is a doctoral candidate in the Mathematics and Science Education PhD program at the University of Chicago's Department of Curriculum Instruction, and she currently teaches AP Environmental Science and Honors Biology at Chicago Public Schools. I'm just going to give a shout out for Chicago Public Schools there because I worked with them too. Jason and Ayesha, I believe you have planned to say a bit more about yourselves before we start today, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to look at slide 2.
Okay, I'll get the slides up if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so just to give a little background, kind of like also my kind of positionality here, I'm just going to be honest with transparent my identities with you all. I identify as a Black cis male, spiritual. I'm a husband, father of 5, Midwesterner, as was mentioned that I teach at Evanston, but also live in Evanston as well. And a little bit of my kind of educational journey. I've been all over the place, but it all led me to this point here, which I'm very happy to be in this space and place with you all. As mentioned, I'm a national certified teacher, my bachelor's and master's in cultural anthropology from Bowling Green State University, a master's in education from DePaul, master's in biology from Clemson, and I am a current doctoral student at UIC. Actually, Ayesha and I are both in the same program. We're intellectual mates here in this journey here, and been working in honors bio, and also I teach emerging world language biology. I don't really call it ELL anymore. because I find that that word is problematic for them. So I say that it's emerging world language. They are multi-language individuals, and I learn from them. And also I do that with physical science as well.
So, hey everyone, I'm Ayesha T. Qazi-Lampert. I'm going to start with my identity first. I'm Asian American, specifically South Asian and Central Asian American. I'm of Afghan, Pakistani diaspora. So I was actually born in Peshawar and I came here when I was 1 year old. So I'm a Midwesterner as well. I grew up in the outskirts of Chicago, and then I've been living in Chicago for the past 12 years. I've been at UIC for 12 years and counting since 2010. So I got my bachelor's in biological sciences at UIC, my master's in science ed, and I am with Jason in the same doctoral program together. I currently work as, this is gonna be my 6th year, teaching AP Environmental Science and Honors Biology. I teach 4 sections of AP Enviro and 1 section of Honors. I'm also an associate for Science and Ed at the Field Museum. So I collaborate with scientists at the museum, and that has led to 2 publications thanks to collaborative work there. I'm also a co-director of the Chicago Environmental Educators Network. So myself and my colleague Yolanda, we manage 250 educators that are passionate about this topic. And we're excited to talk about some of the work that we all have been doing in place, centered in community.
That is awesome. And we're so honored and thrilled to have you here. And thank you for spending part of your summers to come and share with colleagues here online. We wanted to start off, as we do, with a broad framing question just about how you both define community climate justice education, and perhaps talk a bit about like the pedagogical commitments you hold in that work. And so we'll turn it back to you and just get that image of what compels the work and feeds the work from each of you.
Thank you so much. So when I think about the first word community, I really have to unpack that, because I really have to understand that community means so many different things depending on one's experience with that, one's proximity to being of ethnicity and religion and racially. These all things, and there's lots of other things that will intersect to help define one's kind of ideal, what community is. And so when we talk about community, we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware of where we situate ourselves in defining that term and those who we're going to be working with. And when we say that, then as the picture here I'm trying to portray is that this work that we find so passionate about, we cannot do it in a silo. It behooves us to work with other folks. And in that capacity, when we're working with other folks of different backgrounds, we have to be very cognizant of our own kind of internal stuff. And that kind of luggage comes with some issues of biases that we may have. And how do we work with that and work through that so that we can make the collective that much more stronger. Hence why I say the power of a critical, conscientious community bent toward social racial justice is such a powerful entity in and of itself. And so it is very important that when we're doing this work, that you, one, kind of throw out your ego and realize how important it is to work with others. And also, two, respecting and acknowledging those other folks' funds of knowledge and respecting that knowledge is as important as yours.
And when I think of community climate justice work, just to build on this idea of community-centered, I want to acknowledge that we are teaching students of diverse backgrounds, beliefs, values, and systems. And so I like to start it with the universal beliefs that we all are trying to fight for, and just trying to bring everybody together. So I like to always share, and this is an activity you can do with students right away, is you guys come up with universal beliefs that you all want to fight for, or you can just list them and have a discussion over it, depending on how much time you have. And so all living things have the right, and when I say all living things, I'm thinking beyond just the very human-centric point of view. So all living things have the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. And so I always like to go back to this to understand what community climate justice means. I also want to point out to students and colleagues that this field is very interconnected. It's interdisciplinary and intergenerational, the 3 I's. everyone has to work together in collaboration, and it's this constant struggle. And it's not just climate justice, it's also environmental justice and health justice and mental health justice and educational justice and social justice. And so I always like to tell colleagues that you can be an art teacher and you can display art and advocate for something within your environment. You can speak up about something and share, in whether it's poetry or through radio or through writing. There's different ways of modes of communication trying to advocate for the same thing. And this is where this field gets super exciting, is everyone can bring in their expertise. We can exchange those skills and knowledge to fight for the same things. And so I always say the power of community and the power of education, this is an ongoing cycle. So we're going to always be in this sort of field doing this work. The last thing I want to bring up is it's not just defining what community climate justice means, but also recognizing the work that has been done before. And so there's 3 pieces of literature that I wanted to share, because I think it's important we always do the homework and check out some of the stuff that's been done and is going on. And so the Hermes principles, the first document that you see, the principles of EJ, environmental justice, that's a great framework to start with students to understand those basic principles of just organizing. What does universal principles fighting for justice look like? I have students read these principles silently. And for CPS, we start school 2 weeks from today, or 2 weeks from now. And so I'll have my students pick a principle that really speaks to them, and then they share it out loud to the class. And so that's a great way to start that conversation and relate it to some of the work that's being done within the space that you reside in. The second article is really specific to Chicago and is really searching the community climate justice work that's happening now. What are the fights that are happening now? Like, acknowledge the past. The Hermes principles came out a while back. So we're talking about documents, 20, 30 years ago. And now we're talking about present day. The third document is being critical of our current structures. And so, for example, besides me teaching, the other work that I'm engaged in is trying to address the public pension fund. So we teachers, we fund $602 million, the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund, into fossil fuel infrastructure. That's a lot of money. And so we need to be critical of the structures we're also in.
Should we stop and pause for a second? And Deb, I don't know if you have a reflection on kind of that initial framing, but otherwise,
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a few things. I was actually just adding something to the chat, because one of the things that Ayesha, I really noticed about this idea of values and beliefs, this, Megan Banks talked about this as axiological understandings, and others have sort of focused on this in different ways. But it's this trajectory of how we come to understand these beliefs. So I was adding the Bally principles of climate justice, which were built on those original environmental justice principles. And I'm just wondering, if you have other things to say before we go on about how do we even come to those shared value statements for shared futures? How do we do that?
Yeah, I just love centering discussions on controversy. I think you learn so much in the uncomfortable. So with students, I always start off by sharing what do you care about, or how do you want to see the future? Let's reimagine what a healthful world looks like. And once we start to unpack those wants and trying to understand the foundation of what can lead to that, and that's why it depends on how much time you have. For me, sometimes this is more than a 100-minute class. Maybe it takes me a week or 2. And sometimes I do have to provide those guidelines and then have them sort of jump off from there and kind of share more than just what I listed there.
No, that's great.
For me, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, pop in.
I was going to say, for me, where I taught at before, it was simply looking at an image. I used Google and projected an image of where we were at and asked them, what's going on with this image that we're watching from a satellite view of our city? And students were noticing, where's the green? But there's no, where are the trees? I'm not seeing any of that. And so when we would scroll over not that far into another city, there's plush trees, and I'm like, what do y'all think's going on with that? What is this area? What do you know about this area? And then, you know, some kid would say, isn't that where all the rich white folks live? And then there's a conversation that starts from there. Why is there more green there and not here? What are the things around here? And then things start to escalate, and we start to, and the question is why? Why is it this way?
What I love about this, I'm like flashing to different things. You wrote a really great NSTA piece a couple of years back that I'll drop in chat, where you open up some of the satellite Google launch kind of work that you do with with students. So like, just as a worked example that goes a little bit kind of deeper into a case. I'm also like struck by, I was flashing as you were both talking about like how you think about community and then how you launch community at such an important time here as we approach the school year, to think about what do we center as we launch our learning communities in classrooms. And so, you know, Adrienne Marie Brown has the Find Your Flock guidance. But I think I hear you also both saying like, you kind of need to build your flock as well, like within the classroom. And like those GMS principles and others like is what a fabulous way to launch, to, you know, build your flock and to find points of shared value and common purpose. So I was really resonating to that. Thank you for the pieces. Well, I think we're excited to actually see what this work looks like in each of your school and community contexts. So we asked you to pull together some kind of examples of the work that you do and have done. And then we'll like open that up a bit and think together about like what we value in that work and how we find our way into it. So I'll turn it back to you. And I don't know which of you wants to launch off.
Yeah, this is my slide. So in my class, so I was fortunate enough, and I have to give reference to and acknowledge that I'm fully aware that not all school districts can send teachers or purchase certain things for teachers to do certain things. So I'm going to be very conscientious of that and acknowledge that privilege that I had, and to inform you that this particular experience, however, it was a privilege. It was a very unique and important experience that I had that helped me to kind of put together or glue together some of the pieces I've been doing in the past to make it much more organic and fluid. And that was the experience I had for a workshop for a week doing the democratic classroom workshop with my instructor, several instructors actually, but it was Christopher Fontana from Full Circle Leadership. And so the kind of pedagogical framework of this is to essentially remove the teacher and the ego of the teacher so that students will be appreciated for their funds of knowledge, respected to where they're coming from, and give them more kind of centered in the processing of running the class. Now, that doesn't mean it is like totally crazy and you're not participating. You're participating, but you find yourself doing kind of less lecturing, less kind of traditional kind of assessing the way you think you do. And it's more of a collective piece that students are participating in. Now, this is my first time doing this, and I'm going to kind of exercise these things this school year, but I am so psyched in doing that. And it helps to build a bridge work for me doing my whole class inquiry work, because the kind of lessons I typically do is basically I center a problem and students take hold of that and they go with it. And however they go with it, they go. I may come in a whole class inquiry mindset. I may come in as a character to represent an assistant to that process. I can even come in as a thought and I'll have a name tag and it's like, I am this. And they can't acknowledge me as Mr. Foster. They have to acknowledge me as this thought, and I'm just presenting questions and clues. You know, as I said before, if I do come in as a character, I am in character. I'll have a wig, I will have mustache, I'll have a name, and I'm there for that particular purpose. Because I'm doing democratic classroom, it helps for me to situate this from day one. And it helps me to kind of develop that kind of mindset. So when we get to whole class, there's a continuating thread. And so creating classroom democratic constitutions is essential to get started off on that, where students will create what they think an ideal classroom is like. So one way to do that is just to ask your students, when you were on a successful team or successful anything, what were those attributes? What were they like? What was it like when you were on something that was not successful? Take those things together, and as a class, you piece those things together and make it. I, for one, I don't share a class constitution with another class. It's private, it's for them, and it is dynamic. We can change it. If I have a transfer student come in, that transfer student is asked the questions as well, and they participate, and we change in this kind of democratic way of approaching what should the environment like this be like? How do we include this person in the community is involved in that process. With democratic classroom, you will gain ways of listening practices. Everyone has a different style of listening. Some people, when they listen, they're writing. They're just kind of doing something else. And to be aware of where someone's coming from is important when you're developing that kind of living ecosystem of a community. In my class, student generate roles. Everyone has, we're careful to call it roles, not jobs, because jobs seem to be a lot more kind of punitive in the name. So everyone has a role. Those roles are also dynamic. They could change. You can add to it. You can move to someone else. But these are ways of developing the community of the classroom. And if you front load this early on, it will make your end game that much more self-running. And you'll find yourself doing less of the things that we frown upon as instructors when we're in the end of the school year, we're saying the same thing over and over again. This is a way to kind of put it on students to have more onus and control of that process.
Yeah.
Can I just like pop in with a reflection? Actually, Deb, it goes back, we were doing an NSTA session. I don't know if you remember it, but a high school chemistry teacher asked a question. I don't know if you want to tell the story.
I remember that very explicitly. It's like the one that sticks in my brain. He asked a question after we were talking about just this, Jason, like it was right around the time we started working together, actually. And yeah, so he asked about, well, that's nice that you're building community, but it seems like it's not practical. We don't have enough time to spend all this time at the front end building community because we have so much to cover. And my response to him in that moment, which is very much what you've just laid out, is, well, our responsibility is to teach each and every student in our classrooms, and we're not doing that. We're not actually teaching if we're not building community. So you're just talking for the rest of the year at that point. And so some sort of version of that answer. And it was good because he actually, I said it politely and kindly because I, wanted him to hear it, but it's that kind of context of, it's not about covering content. It's about each and every wonderful little treasure you have in your classroom and how to lift them up.
And that's one thing that comes about in the democratic classroom. You realize that students have access to amounts of knowledge that they're really given time to actually present and express. And when you center the community part first, the curriculum and all that stuff is going to take care of itself. It's going to come out. It's going to be a natural kind of organic experience that they will have. And in connecting it with their kind of community building and experience, it's going to stick in here longer. It's like, oh, when we did that thing, it meant, oh, okay, now I remember that. And I have kids coming to telling me after the year's over, Mr. Foster, I totally remember this because you came in the costume and blah, blah, blah. And, by the way, I found out this article that I ran into over this, and it's just like, they're there.
Yeah.
And one last thing to say is that in this process, when they're doing it, something that I think is a lot of times overlooked, and it's part of that kind of those kind of forensic shows where everything wraps up beautiful in a package at the end of the show, is that science is so imperfect. Students need to realize that experiments, they don't wrap up so nicely like you think they are in reality. And that's the process of keeping on this, that we keep doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, and on the topic of honesty, that just segues nicely into that next example. What were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I was just that, educators have long asked about this and thinking about how you engage in this type of work. I'm excited to see an example that we can kind of unpack and think about. So yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah, so for Chicago, I mean, we're facing a ton of different industrial polluters. And so General Iron, a scrap metal recycler, was hanging out on the Lincoln Park neighborhood, a predominantly white affluent neighborhood. I teach in a predominantly white affluent area. So I do have students who are from that neighborhood. And General Iron was engaging in multiple violations, and some of my students were part of the movement to push General Iron out from Lincoln Park. They successfully did that, but then General Iron moved to the southeast side of Chicago, where my husband works. This is a neighborhood on the border of Indiana, so Illinois and then Indiana border. This is the furthest Chicago public school on the Indiana border. So you took a scrap metal recycler that got pushed out and you place it in a predominant Black and Latinx neighborhood. And so seeing the progression of how it was pushed out by residents so quickly and easily to this year-long fight that led to a lot of my colleagues, including some of us who ended up like in solidarity hunger striking, but there was a huge community effort behind this from the southeast side to prevent this company from moving in. This was happening in real time while I was teaching my students. And I think this is why it's so important to be on top of environmental movements that are happening in your local area. So like my students saw the progression in 1 year of this fight that was successful, and then the active environmental racist harm that was happening within the city. And so students were able to see this in action. And we as educators, we have the skills to use the tools that we have, the voice that we have to communicate in very meaningful and interesting ways. And so the next slide, what I ended up doing and my students ended up doing, and again, my students are minors. I want to make sure I get their permission before I share their work. So I do not have their specific work here, but I do have the work that I ended up doing in complement of their work, is on Canva created digital info boxes of the situation. And it wasn't even just for my classroom. I mean, we educators, we teach beyond the four walls of the classroom. I started sharing that on Twitter, community newsletters, something I really recommend. And I think there is a traditional way of looking at high school communication with parents is that you sometimes hear like limited communication. I honestly do a monthly newsletter. I keep up with like the nature preserve park events that are happening. I include this graphic in there. I want the parent community to be just as involved and to understand some of the stuff that's happening in Chicago. And you'd be surprised so much support you get. This is community-centered climate justice work. It involves a community to like understand the process and how intricate and complicated this is. What was really a highlight, I would say, so far in my 6-year teaching career is the next slide. My student ended up creating this digital graphic on their own. So they created a digital poster of for General Iron in support, and they created a flyer. They ended up organizing like a student-led conversation. And for me, the highlight was this wasn't an assignment I assigned. This wasn't something I asked them to do. They did this on their own. So when we engage in this work and we're passionate about this work, students see it. And I think that's why it's so important to be on top of what's happening in your space, because it's relevant, it's new, it's refreshing. And what was really cool is my students interacted with my husband's students and other students at George Washington on their own. We did not facilitate that. They had their own conversation. They were into this movement as well. And that was probably the most powerful, is when you see them feeling uplifted enough to do this work. The other two slides that you're seeing, so these photos I've taken myself. So you want to show up to community. It's not just, it's like if you have the capacity to be in spaces, I think it's great to also be in that physical space. And if you're allowed and it's appropriate to do so, take a picture of that space. So you can see us, we're in the rain. This was going on for, about 2 years, and just being in support you want to be there and support, and you can talk about that experience to your students of like being there in community. And it doesn't even have to be centered on your own voice. I also brought in a lot of people through Zoom, guest speakers, going through that, official process. That process is worth it. They hear it from different voices.
This is really fabulous. It really, there's several things that you've said that I'm just like thinking about all these different connections. So one is that idea of just showing up. The principle of reciprocity and work that we do in partnership generally, and as educators engaged in community kind of partnerships, it's not necessarily about what a community organization can do for you in any one moment in the school. It's about building that relationship and showing up where it's appropriate, whether that's an educational moment for you as an educator or just a personal moment with your family to be out there in the mix. So yeah, totally feel you on that one. And I really love the newsletter idea that you have with the way in which that creates, it's not just a newsletter about what's going on in your classroom, it's what's going on in the community. And it's a resource that you're creating for the community so that they can actually think and be part of that work with you and with their students and their kids, your students.
I mean, it strikes me as like a public pedagogy move as an activist educator doing environmental work for community with community. And that's just like a really important, I think, reframing of how a lot of people think about how instruction should be like architected. Like, it's just like, oh no, it like centers on like feeding information out towards purposes of justice, like across contexts, across different modes, through your Twitter handle, in community life. And so like, just really love those expansions that you're kind of naming in that space. I wonder, there was a question in the chat that Jason responded a bit to, just about like, how do you work with your colleagues in your building around this? Like, how much coordination goes on to like, not to be the one teacher doing this kind of, community-centered activism work, or like, what's that dynamic like with your colleagues?
I'm not going to lie and say that when we first started talking about silos, existing in a silo, that is key to trying to communicate with others. I was fortunate enough to have other colleagues of different disciplines who were also being very conscientious of their work. Maybe not to the level where I'm kind of going into, but they wanted to do that process. They want to get started. And that's basically sometimes all what you need to start from. And so I say that because at one point in one of my lessons, when we are interrogating the environment, we were looking at starting to bring in issues of chemistry. And so I brought in a chemistry teacher and teamed up with the chemistry teacher and their students. And we kind of looked at, the chem students were like the experts, talking to my students about just the basic fundamentals of chemistry and why these things are important for what's going on in the local environment, and more importantly, how they apply their kind of biological understanding of life to those chemical items that we talked about in class, which was very unique. And I thought that was very powerful. And before I turn over to Ayesha, also too, just letting you know that the results you get from doing this work, from expanding out to communities, it's all different. For example, when my students collected their data from doing their experimentation, one of the things we were tasked with was sharing this information with constituents outside in the community. And so we wrote letters to our local congresswoman, at that time, it was Rahm Emanuel and it was Rauner. And our local congresswoman, Jan Schaskowski, I believe I'm saying her name correctly, wrote us a wonderful letter back, and how she's going to take our results, our actual lab results, present it to the floor and try to come up with a decision with her constituents to implement. This will be considered a hate crime if a local entity is purposely doing this and introducing these toxins into predominantly Black and brown communities. That was powerful. The kids reacted to that in such a wonderful way. And then even Rahm Emanuel, he signed a bunch of letters addressing each of the kids. But then there's the opposite, because Rauner basically talked about himself and dismissed all of their findings. So that was good for all the students, to have that range of response about the topic. It made them become more engrossed in the activity that we're doing.
That's awesome. The political dimensions of like how science is taken up or not. Yeah, wow. We never see that in the world today. So, Aisha, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think this idea of skill sharing is so important. Like everybody has a skill that they want to bring to the table. And so when I meet with people, and I think this is just being in the world of like climate change policy and everyone having different views, is just you see each other as an asset. And then how do I work with you to push this forward here in Chicago? Or how do I work forward with you in this classroom? So when I look at my colleagues, I think of like, okay, we're all assets. We all bring some sort of skills. How do I work with you to make this better? I'm not going to agree 100% with everything, and that's going to be true for everyone. But at the same time, they're there to teach, and I'm here to teach, but we can like work on something together. So I think just like being very clear and thoughtful with colleagues of like what you want to achieve, like what are your goals? What are the things you're going to try to like fight for in the school year, whether it's clean water, clean soil, clean air, and then moving in that direction with your building if you're trying to fight for green infrastructure.
I mean, it's really striking that we're living at a moment when large federal investment is about ready to find its way into law, and the importance of getting clarity around that compass you're kind of highlighting of where should that work be focused, and how do we build the right coalitions around the work to keep it focused on issues of racial justice. And like, you know, because we know often historically what happens when money starts flowing towards response. And so like, how do we do our important work, and how do we bring intergenerations into that work to like keep, you know, channeling towards the important directions.
You know, the one last thing that we've been sort of talking around, I think, but is very much, I think, at the foundation of what this type of pedagogy is doing is I was thinking about the motivation that students have when they're engaging in learning. And you're really talking about getting into like the deep identity roots, like you were talking about at the beginning, these deep identity roots of what motivates students to learn, and like what's out there in the real world that they care about, that they want to engage in, and that their families encourage them in their learning because their families care about this work too. So really, really interesting. All right. So I know we have a few more sort of shares around the work and the approach. I see that your next slide was around Dr. Bullard. So I actually thought I would just throw the link in here for the new Bullard Center that was just launched, I think this year or like sometime this year, I think, at Texas Southern University. So really excited about that. And I'm also going to do a shout out for Dr. Beverly Wright at the Deep South Center as also the co-mother of the environmental justice movement. So I'll throw her information in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the next couple slides, I just wanted to share like resources for teachers to like check out. And I always like to start, I feel like students really need to know the names of the father of the EJ movement, mother of the EJ movement, especially since Hazel Johnson's from Chicago. And so students have to understand like the history, the people who have coined, or just folks that have done the work in academia and beyond. And so anyone on the call that needs to do a little bit of homework, I'd say look into both people. They're great people to start conversations with, or just to have conversations about. You can also find audio pieces and like on YouTube, them sharing and speaking, and Hazel Johnson's audio is quite emotional to watch when, you know, speaking on public TV, trying to fight back. And so having students unpack that, I feel like humanizing the figures is just as important. So it's not just talking about them, but also having them speak for themselves. And I think audio is powerful. The next slide is a little bit specific to Cheryl Johnson, who is the daughter of Hazel Johnson, alive, running the People for Recovery PCR organization in Chicago. I think it's important, again, to see organizations that have been doing this work for a long time. That's why I purposely added the years there, because this field seems new. And I mean, that's how it's kind of fed to all of us, but it's like, it's been going on. Folks have been doing this work. And so we need to acknowledge the hard work that's being done, and then also supporting the groups that are there. And so there's always plenty of resources to check out. The next slide that I have, and I'm just like sharing tools for people who want to start engaging in this work. One activity I like to do beyond the HEMAS principles is I like to do an asset mapping activity. have students really plan out all of the resources that are in your community. Let's draw out the map. Where's the library? Where are the parks? Where are the buses? Where's the industry? Once you start to list everything that's there, students get to realize, wait, we're missing this, or maybe the library is not in my neighborhood, and I don't see any parks, and maybe the next neighborhood has like 11 parks and I only have like one. And so that's where you can really dive into those critical conversations. The next slide is your environmental reports. You can sign up for these reports for free. I know this is for the Midwest. So for me, I really like the quarterly reports that come out. I include that in the parent newsletter that I send out, have people look at data that's constantly being published. The Environmental Law and Policy Center in Chicago is constantly pushing out stuff, policy related to trying to cut down emissions and more than just that. And so students get to see in real time some of the hot topics that our politicians are like engaging in. The next slide includes digital maps. So you can do asset mapping, you can look at environmental reports, you can look at digital maps that are created by different universities and environmental organizations. They're great spaces to kind of launch that conversation. I think a lot of teachers that I talk to are hesitant to talk about this topic because of how it's politicized. I think it's really important to have students look at the data. And I think that's a very nice way to kind of launch that conversation, have them come up with the questions, have them engage in what they're seeing. I think that's probably the best way to go if you're someone who's very uncomfortable at like starting right away with environmental racism. It's like, if you want to start with the data that you have and then building on that way students see that it's not just coming from you, but it's also coming from published data and people in humanizing perspectives, right? I think it's like we see the struggle when teachers share what they do and do not want to share. The last two things I want to quickly share with the slides. The next slide is about scientific articles. If you have access to someone in academia, I would say try to get 2 to 3 page scientific articles related to like climate change, progress. I have my students read that raw scientific article, unpack really like challenging whatever jargon that's there, and they get to see what's in real time, and they appreciate that. They like that the stuff is not being, as they would say, it's not being baby down to me. And it's just like, yeah, it's like I respect them as a community member to also read the work that's being published in this field. The last thing I want to share is academic Twitter. I think this is a resource people tend to neglect. There's some amazing people on Twitter, and there's a lot of academics who are doing this work, posting in real time. And so you can check out some of the work that's being done from a very critical perspective as well on the climate crisis.
That is wonderful. It's interesting, the data conversation. There's been a number of projects in more conservative areas that have actually taken a data first approach to this type of justice intersection, or even just straight up to climate change. It's been really interesting because one of the things we want to do as educators is make sure we're not indoctrinating students, but that we're actually getting them to be critical consumers of information and asking those questions. And so this is a really amazing approach to do that. That's fundamentally part of the scientific methodological learning activity, is like, what is evidence? How do we understand it? Like, how do we look at it? And I love that you included maps, because as a geographer at heart, I also just love the idea that there's different forms of data that might speak to people in different ways. And maps are actually really powerful for youth.
One of the insights that's kind of coming up this summer as people navigate the political dynamics that are coming off of the anti-CRT kind of polarization from the radical right, is that actually centering on data is a very important strategy to kind of like keep it centered, but like keep it centered on data. And so it's kind of a way for educators that are in more vulnerable spaces to actually still kind of hold to the work while avoiding kind of the crazy language policing that's starting to kick up in a number of different places. So I'll kind of share that insight I've learned from colleagues this summer.
And I just want to dive in real quick, sorry to add, like as a person of color teaching this topic, it's like you're walking on eggshells. So it's like, it's like the two principles I think of is just like, what are you willing to risk today? But also what are you willing to like, and how are you engaging in self-preservation? You have to
Mhm.
do both. So it's like, how are you engaging in this way of like pushing, but also you still want to do what you want to do and you still want to keep pushing. Yeah.
Aisha, as we were like getting ready for today, you were talking kind of very strategically about how educators stay in a good professional spot, given that critiques or attacks may come up. And I wonder, this might be a good moment for you for you both to kind of reflect a bit on what advice do you have for educators who might, open themselves up to being vulnerable in certain ways by taking up this focus. What advice would you give them?
So the advice I would share is work in community. Community is so powerful. Some of the work from General Iron has led to some of my good colleagues being put on the news, pressured to be fired from the Board of Ed. And luckily, because of the community we have, and we're together, and again, these were untenured teachers, close to being tenured. And so the reason I bring this up is like, if you're an untenured teacher, know your risks, but also work in community. They were untenured teachers and their jobs were saved. I mean, everyone, it's like you cannot work, going back to what Jason was saying, and like working in silos and in isolation. You have to work in community, and it's so much more powerful that way.
Yeah, spot on. I was gonna, before say answer your question, Dr. Bell, go back to the one slide Aisha had of the two prominent Black environmentalists and how powerful it is for a child to see images of themselves in such a prolific manner that a lot of kids of color will see this work as this is not, has nothing to do with me. I mean, this is like some, some white kid issue that they always talk about. How does it have, what does that have to do with me? And when they are able to see themselves and see why folks like themselves are doing this work and the importance of it, it changes, it's a game changer. If anything, it will get them to start thinking about it. And it may not be a game changer right away, but you've planted the seed, symbolically here. You planted the seed, and that's going to grow. And as you are, so be very conscientious of images and how images play a role in doing this work. So for this slide here that I shared, that we've already kind of established here is that, in order to I always think of this as the kind of flight attendant thing. So when you're on the airplane, the flight attendant, when she's doing, or he or they are doing their work, they always say, when you're doing the oxygen part, when you have that mask, you have to do yourself first before you can help someone else. So that's my kind of thing here. You must decolonize some of your own biases first before you can step front and doing, and that will be an ongoing journey. There's no endpoint with that. I'm still mentally checking myself and learning new material all the time. It is not a state where you will get to and you're done. You're always doing that. And that comes to also your pedagogy and how you're doing this work. I already know, and I was sharing this with Aisha off camera, that what I did in Skokie with this initial paper that I wrote compared to now in Evanston are completely two different things. Evanston has been doing some remarkable work with environmental justice. And so the questions now are going to be much different than it was before. It's going to be about like, what are we doing here? What is working? How can we make those things better? How can we have a critical lens to the work that's already been done? So it's very important to realize that, that you will enter this unyielding restructuring due to your dynamic developing critical lens, and that you will make mistakes, all right? And when those mistakes, you have to own it. And then also check in the ego. I mean, although you are brilliant, you don't know everything. And appreciating that those funds of knowledge from your community, from your students. Sometimes I get some great questions out of nowhere from students. I'm like, dude, I never thought about that. That questioning from students is what spawned me to create the environmental justice lesson that I created long ago, because a student asked me before the end of the school year, like, Mr. Foster, why do I need to know this stuff? What's the purpose of this? Dude, yeah, I don't want to teach biology like this for the rest of my life. I gotta find a different, it's not resonating with me. You're so right. And as Aisha said, and Deb and Phil, you have to seek collaboration, either within your school, outside your school. Be very deliberate about that and be very practical and serious about making those connections. So those are the things that I find very important doing this work.
I wanted to also comment, because I agree completely with that. And the more and more that we're moving forward on our climate challenges as a globe and as local communities, the more that scientists and, you know, engineers and others are starting to like gain more humility in the ways in which they have needed to work with environmental justice organizations. And also folks that have been working in this space for like 30 plus years, but have been working in institutions that weren't necessarily R1 institutions. Maybe they were in a range of different HBCU universities across the US. Their expertise is becoming lifted and leveraged now. And so like really thinking about who those folks are, I'm going to drop an example of such a person into the chat, Dr. Singleton, who's at Dillard University in New Orleans and has been the center of incredible amount of mentoring for youth and research in climate science for decades. And like not very many people would know him relative to, you know, some of the other climate scientists that get a lot of airtime. So we don't actually lack for examples right now. It's just about being able to locate them, lift them. So.
Yeah. So in the spirit of that, we're gonna we asked you to also gather together some resources that you wanted to share. So we're gonna turn to that in just a second. But Jason, going back to kind of what you were talking about a few minutes ago about helping students make those identity connections in the classroom and like making sure that you're representing through visuals and other, you know, stories, those connections that will really deeply connect to them and help them feel like they belong in that work, that their full selves are welcome in that work. And you had just authored a new STEM teaching tool a couple weeks ago that we published about attending to race and identity in science instruction with Jeannie Chowning and Hanako Asuga and Wanda Bryant. And so I just wanted to like point people in that direction because you've pulled together dozens of resources around identity affirming moves that you can make in the curriculum and instruction. And there's just such important work to go on in that direction. But with that, we know you have lots of other things to share with us. So I don't know who's gonna like open up. Maybe Ayesha, you're up next, sharing some of your EJ work, I think, in Illinois.
Sure, absolutely. I did see a question quickly that I just wanted to address. Jocelyn asked, like, can you say one more time about what you're saying about untenured versus tenured teachers? I think it's really important we protect our untenured teachers and really be there and support them. And if you're an untenured teacher and you're listening right now, forge those connections with those tenured teachers. You need each other. You need that community to protect you as you move in these vulnerable spaces. Like these conversations are vulnerable. And so I just want to keep it very real. This work is not easy. It's hard work. And so you want to be in community and you want good relationships with the people you're working with. This document here is a collaboration of 40 organizations. It's the current environmental literacy for Illinois framework that we just came out. It took us about 2 years of like online conversations to come up with this document. Obviously, there's more work to come. But for those who are interested in environmental literacy for Illinois and where we're at, it's a long 40-page document. You can check it out. That's a great place to start that conversation if you're in a department that's trying to look into what literacy looks like, how to bring that into the science classroom. The next slide that I have is one is so I'm going to start with the one on the right. It's a template you can use from the CTU Climate Justice Committee, which is a committee I serve in. So we do like climate justice courses. Here is a lesson that you're more than welcome to use. This is for any teacher who's trying to do this work, that's trying to talk about climate justice, but specifically, how do you connect it to racial justice? And then how are you trying to address climate policy? So being a little bit more explicit here. Now, I know we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but feel free to like email me and I'm happy to go more into detail on how to like create a lesson starting with this and then trying to add more lessons to that with time. On the left is just, again, this is us in community. So here's the committee. I don't work in isolation. I work with a lot of people that I'm about to see in an hour or so. And so we are going to keep pushing, you know, our current structures with the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund, that's $602 million funding the oil infrastructure that it has to change. Yeah.
So these are some of the resources that I have come across that have impacted me doing my praxis. I noticed in listening to the seminar before our hours, there was a doctor on that mentioned another article by Bang. Bang's work is a monster. She does some really good insight, and bringing in that indigenous lens that often we neglect, which is highly important. And so for me, what is very cognizant that I do is understanding this kind of idea of Euro-Western ideals of science being the only way of doing science, and really working on that. And not only looking at indigenous ways of doing science, but holding it as equal or as important to how we do science, which a lot of folks don't seem to do. And so there's an article that I'm sharing there that really helped me to kind of, it's a great article about kind of desettling expectations of what we perceive science to be. Oh, sorry, my room here is motion detected, so the lights are. And then books that I've looked at. So a phenomenal book that I've started to look at during this summer, during Juneteenth, is called We Are Each Other's Harvest. And so I read like maybe the intro in chapter 1 of that book, and it rocked me. It got me to really think about the importance of Black farmers to this country, and how Black farming and how my ancestors of farmers of African descent and the strong similarities between how they treated the land to indigenous folks doing the land. There is a kind of symmetry between the two that is uncanny. And so as I'm reading that book, I'm thinking about how I do my unit on ecology and how I can do it different and much more inclusive of considering those kind of Black farmers' voices and how they treated the land and why they farmed such a way they did, which is very unique. And then I'm, doing the plug of a STEM teaching tools. There's several lessons that are on there about getting this work started that I actually use in my implementation of environmental justice pedagogy that are very powerful. And the idea that if you look at this link that I've provided here about the characteristics of white supremacy and culture, you're going to look at that and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this sounds a lot like science. And why do we do it this way? And that's good. That's a good starting point to understand and consider. And also, too, there are some great lessons on Fred Hutch, science education, there to take a look at in doing this work as well. I provided my contact, and a shamelessly plug, I have a couple lessons on teacher pay teachers. I'm not asking you to give me your mortgage payment. We're talking about a couple bucks, but they are a way of kind of getting things started. And I arrange it so that you can change it based on your economic status. I understand that there's some schools that are filthy rich, some schools that don't have much. So you can, there's a lot of things I do on a budget myself, because quite frankly, it takes too long for certain entities to get rolling. So I'm just like, I will try to do it myself on a low budget as possible to get the outcomes that I want to get across with my students. So those are my references. Ayesha.
Yeah, so I'm going to share some of the stuff that I'm into right now. So you get to see current me, and then stuff that I'm going to be engaging in 2 weeks with students. So the first 3 links I talked about during this presentation. So you need access to the principles of EJ, the environmental justice in Chicago. It's been one battle at a time by NRDC. And then how workers unknowingly fund the climate crisis with their pension. I think that's an interesting read for anyone who wants to push themselves a little bit and look at structures critically. The book that I'm currently reading is called The Solutions Are Already Here. This is a great book. I really like this book. And then currently I'm listening to the Threshold podcast, so feel free to check that out. And you can also check out lessons and a lot of resources on the Zen Education Project, a People's Curriculum for the Earth, teaching climate change and the environmental crisis. This is great. We use this for our CTU climate justice series that we have with teachers here. I have my email and I have my Twitter. I respond to probably Twitter a little bit quicker. So if you do want to engage in your opinion on a Threshold podcast or the book, I'm happy to engage in that conversation with you.
That's awesome. Thank you all. Thank you both for so many great resources and suggestions. If you want to follow up on some of the Zen Ed project work and the People's Curriculum, you can look at the May webinar that Tim Swinehart did in the series, and they're revising it. So stay tuned. In a couple of years, I think there'll be a new edition. We want to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially want to thank Jason and Ayesha for sharing that vital, inspiring work they've opened up over the past hour. Thank you both for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We'll have a recording of this discussion that'll be posted on the climate learning section of the stemteachingtools.org website, and resources and papers that will be linked to the notes of the video. So this will all be available for folks.
And we want to thank Corey Shee, who's working behind the scenes to make all the good stuff happen. That's part of the webinar series and other efforts. Thank you, Corey. And please join us next month on September 9th from 11 to noon Pacific, when Nick Sly of the New Orleans-based performance collective Mondo Bizarro will be joining us. Deb knows him well and his work. He'll describe some of the various artistic performances and pieces they use to promote public awareness about climate and environment. And Deb, I don't know if you want to say anything else right there about Nick.
Yeah, I think that comes across well. He's Cajun and deeply rooted in these multiple trajectories, actually, that Jason mentioned, of like indigeneity and Black history and how they crossed over in the New Orleans Bayou area. So it'll be wonderful to have him.
Awesome. So we'll play it forward next month and hope you can join us. If you registered for today, you'll get a notice a day in advance about the next one. But please share the word to others who might not have been able to make it today. We hope to see all of you next month, and take good care. And I hope the rest of the summer is as smooth and joyous as it can be for everyone. So goodbye, everyone. Take care.